Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Inform New Hampshire. My name is Dean Kern, Richie Merritt to my right, and Pat Murphy, guest speaker today. We broadcast on Monday evening, 6:30 p.m. We also rebroadcast every Thursday, 7:30 a.m., Saturday, 9 a.m., Sunday, 2 p.m. You can view our show on YouTube. If you search for Inform New Hampshire, you'll find our channel on YouTube. Feel free to subscribe to our channel. If you'd like to contact us via email, you can see that on the bottom of your screen. If you missed the previous shows, we've talked about the Constitution, the need for formulating or learning that document and getting behind that document to save our country. The National Liberty Alliance is an organization that Richie and I are state coordinators for, and has some of the solutions to America's problems, constituting all 3,133 of our counties back to common law grand juries, giving us the tools necessary to root out corruption in our government. And Richie and I are committed to sharing news and information that you won't find in the mainstream media. Today we have a guest speaker. Pat's going to talk to us about blue ways and the federal government stealing land from we the people, similarly to what's happening out in the West with Oregon and the Bundys and the Hammond Ranch. So welcome, Pat, and take it away.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Dean. Thanks a lot, Rich. Nice to see you two guys, and I appreciate what you do. My motivation in doing this is just that I grew up in Manchester in the 50s, in a more stable time period, and had a good life in this town with a good family and people that were committed to the nation. Both of my parents were veterans of the Second World War. My father fighting in the Pacific as a paratrooper in New Guinea, all the way to the Philippines. My mother is a battlefield nurse, so we were brought up with a tremendous amount of respect for the country. And we, like a lot of people who have watched things that seem to be on a downward slide, a lot of confusion in the society, and we look for a way to do our job to try to rectify things. I spent my younger life as an educator. My background was teaching history. I've taught American history, European history, courses on the Holocaust. I lecture privately to groups now. And left that some years ago, unhappy with what was going on in education. It seemed like, large factories that were out of touch, and spent a lot of my life in commercial, industrial, medical construction. But now and then I will, when somebody asks me, I will step up to the plate and attempt to do something. And what I was going to talk about today was a number of things. One of the things that I talk about is Agenda 21. You've probably familiar with this document. You've probably seen this, and it deals with how people are going to live in the 21st century. It's a worldwide program, and a part of that is a thing that we saw in 2012 come into existence in this state by imperial dictate when Ken Salazar declared the entire Connecticut River and its aquifer and its tributaries to be the first national blue way. Normally you'd think that would occur in Tsarist Russia, what they call UKs, or in the Soviet Union under Lenin, what they called Nakazi. You simply declare something to be something that it's not. So what we saw was, by executive order, a cabinet member had totally overreached himself, because we know the president himself, with multiple executive orders, has far overreached himself. So apparently it's an infectious disease. But he took 400 miles of the Connecticut River, all of its watershed, its tributaries, the aquifer connected to that, and now suddenly you have a federal control on that. So everybody they're totally impacted by that. That's a big part of it. Now that goes all the way down through Connecticut, Rhode Island, to the sea. It's called the Conte Preserve. He was a Massachusetts state legislator. And the idea with this
Salazar was?
No, this is the Conte Preserve. Salazar was the Secretary of the Interior, who simply by dictate levied and said this would be the first in the country. There was a second, which was down in the south, in Missouri and Arkansas, on the White River, but that has reversed itself as the people were up in arms realizing what was done. So what we saw was an attempt to take this all control of all this water, and naturally, as everything you see in Agenda 21, it was for the betterment of the community, for preservation of the river, for people involved in recreation and things of this nature. So it was given a nice image, but the reality is it's a power grab. It's totally outside the Constitution of the United States. Another part of this that you see in the state right now is a thing called it's a thicket preserve, and people aren't aware of this, but you have another species that supposedly is endangered called the cottontail rabbit, and that thicket preserve covers not only a huge portion of New Hampshire, but all of Massachusetts, all of Rhode Island, most of Connecticut, and all the way into New York to the Hudson River, and maybe a third of this state. And the idea is the same thing right now, that the federal government has an interest in all of that property to preserve this endangered species. So once again, we see the same type of thing. There was an attempt with the blueways on water by the Department of the Interior to change the definition of navigable rivers, because they were limited at one time only to navigable rivers. And what they attempted to do was to say that all water, because it's connected somehow underground or through streams, there's a total control on all water everywhere. But the Supreme Court shot them down on that, but it seems that it just hasn't stopped. We're looking at this grab for property, and this is all over the nation, what's going on right now.
So when the federal government decides to dictatorially usurp people's property rights this way, like the blue way and you call it the thicket preserve.
Yes.
What happens exactly there? Do they then say that these lands are now limited in scope and you cannot have your full property rights anymore, or do they actually take control of the land?
Generally what happens is you're taking areas that are underdeveloped, and so this occurs behind the scenes, and there isn't a lot of notice. So a lot of this is creeping in underneath the radar. Yep. But if you look at this whole process for Agenda 21, which, as it says right here, the United Nations Program of Action, that is a UN program for inventorying all of the land and resources in the world on a regional basis. So it's a part of that system, and it's done through non-governmental groups, recreational groups, forestry preserve groups, conservation groups. So it's a very, very sophisticated system that would involve thousands of people going back generations, all the way into the late 40s, actually. When you look at this, some of the researchers, and you have some great people. Rosa Curry is a great one. Michael Kaufman is a great one. Tom DeWeese is a great one. Michael Shaw. These people lecture on this, and you can pull them up on YouTube or whatever. They're really tremendous, and they'll explain how far back it goes. But you can see some of this on a regional basis going back to about 1945. And if you look at that system of government, and you study your Constitution, as I know both of you guys do, you don't have anything close to regionalism in the Constitution. There's nothing like that. And for instance, I'll give you an example. In my hometown, we had a meeting that dealt with the town area, and the people that came in were involved in the Granite State Commission. Yeah. And what they did was they rolled out a map, and we looked at this, and we asked questions, and it was funny because they had some yellow dots up in one circle, and one of the women asked, "What do the circles represent?" And the guy had the audacity to say, "That's where you're going to live." And I thought to myself, I don't think this is really going to happen. So what
they're going to stick the populace up in one small corner of the county?
Yeah, well, regional systems are socialist systems.
Yep.
You know, if you go back to, if you read the Daily Worker in 1978, the head editor, Morris Zeitlin, came right out and he says right in that copy that regionalism is communism, is exactly what it is. And this is basically, if you look at the history of the Soviet Union, that's what they did. They were set up in regions where all the individual towns, they're going to lose their voting capacity because everything is underneath a regional head with lower councils. So everything comes from the top on down. So what you're seeing is that this taking of property, and this is all, it's done in a very stealthy type methodology, and very flowery and fuzzy type language. It's done in each and every town. You find this all over the world, 7,000 cities, but it's done in such a way that people are deluded into thinking that they are the ones coming up with the plan. I'll give you an example. One of the meetings we had, I asked them about their methodology, consensus. I said, can you explain consensus to me? And this fellow said, well, we take information from each town, and we get the best input from the people, and then we put this down, we take all those elements, and we create this master plan, and it becomes your plan,
The template.
for what you want done. And the reality is, it's just
It's all made up.
it's made up, and it's
Biased on their behalf.
It's a scam. It's very, very biased.
Yep.
And I thought about that. I said, has this been used in the past, and how far back does it go? I said, was it used in the 30s? He said he didn't think so. I said, oh, I think it was done in the 30s. I'm thinking of thousands of meetings, and I'm thinking of millions of pieces of input, and I'm thinking 1935 to 36. I said, and the crowning document is the Stalin Constitution of 36. It's essentially a Soviet system. Your consensus. It's false arrival at a conclusion that was predetermined. And so my question was, why would you bring in a system that is alien to our government? Why are you imposing this on us? And how can that not be something that is actually treasonous, which is what it is?
Well, can I interrupt? I wanted to say something here. I think it's noteworthy. And that is that Lavoy Finicum I think he was assassinated because he blew the whistle on the government and exposed the fact that the resources of Oregon, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, they're all very rich in uranium, gold, and other resources. And to illustrate what Pat is saying here about the water, it's just another resource the government wants to steal, rape, plunder, and pillage from us, however you want to put it. But the fact that this man was assassinated tells you how serious they are. Once they have control, they're not going to relinquish it. And they already have control of the food, the oil, the gold, the uranium, and everything else. Once they get water and they start shutting down water and food, guess what happens to human life? Take this seriously, because it's going to happen if they get control. And I just wanted to interject that because I believe it's very, very important. I watched this man get killed. I watched a lot of his videos where he exposed what was going on. And if we, the people, don't wake up, we're in serious trouble. Thank you for the few minutes, Pat. I appreciate it.
You mentioned something before the show, Pat, that was pretty interesting when you said that our system of government over time with the public schooling system has cut off the stream of information of our history and how we got here. And I'm hoping you'll speak a little bit about that. But in particular, this Agenda 21 you also mentioned is there's older information, whatever this is, that it actually came from.
Well, it's the Gulag Archipelago. I say, if you look at this document, Agenda 21, this United Nations program, this thing is such a controlling document on all aspects of your life. Where you're going to live, how, what type of transportation, what religions are tolerated. It literally would lead to what you find in the Gulag Archipelago.
Yeah.
And Solzhenitsyn, if anybody that hasn't read that, they really need to read that. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons that we wound up in a situation we're in, is that they've been cut off from a knowledge of their history. Not only the history of America, its background.
Most of us don't even know our Constitution.
The nature of the law, the natural law, which makes us unique in the history of the world, that your rights are God-given and they pre-exist the development of government, which is designed simply to protect those, as such an extraordinarily powerful idea. That is what truly makes the United States unique.
Excellent point, too, Pat. Excellent point.
It is the key. And then if you look at alternate systems, if you look at the Soviet system, and I'm of the firm conviction, having studied history since I was a little kid, all of my life, that if you take the 20th century, the primary event to understand is the Russian Revolution. There can be no understanding of modern history without an understanding of what that revolution was, how it was different, its attempt to change human nature, and then you would have to take a look at Lenin as an absolutely evil human being of the first magnitude, which is almost never taught. We're usually taught the same thing, that you had a popular revolution led by Lenin, and he eventually died, and then the wrong guy got onto the bus. That was Stalin. Everything went awry, and it's absolutely nothing like that. So a student today probably would, if you could learn something or have a course to take, it would be comparative revolutionary histories. The American Revolution, with original documents, letters from the committees of correspondence, and their sense of impending doom and creeping dictatorship. You would go to the French Revolution as a prototype for communist revolutions in restructuring a society, and looking at the horrors of the French Revolution, they're so extremely limited in what you're taught. They don't deal with the genocide and the Vendée, and the fact that you have a type of intellectual emerging in history running these. And then finally, the Russian Revolution, which, as Solzhenitsyn said, is a fracture in the spinal cord of Russian history and unleashes this stuff into the world that you're still dealing with today, and you are still dealing with it. When you look at this Agenda 21 and you listen to the buzzwords, all the things that are promised, you find the same thing in that Russian Revolution, everything being promised by Lenin to everyone, particularly to the peasants who wanted land. That was the first step on the revolutionary locomotive that they wanted off of. We want as much land as possible. That's where our whole being is at. So, yeah, they've been cut off from their history, and if you look at Common Core now, where you have very little history taught at this point. Common Core is a national cretinization of your students on an industrial basis. They are totally cut off from history.
Well,
and it's set up to fail.
You just used a word I don't know. Cretinization. Explain that.
Cretinization?
Yeah.
Cretin is. I'm going to get myself into trouble here.
Well,
they're not that sharp.
Before you do that, because it's a very important point. You know more about history, or you forgot more about history than I know, Pat. But I'm in the process now of reading a lot of history books over the last couple of years. And I'm finding out that what I learned in high school, and I was in the school in the 50s and 60s, and I thought I had a good education. I went to parochial school too, which is generally a little better. But I'm finding out that I missed a great deal. I really did, because they didn't present the things that we need to know about the things that you're talking about right now. And our kids, and this is where the people, you got to wake up for your own children's sake and start going to the schools and demanding a better education for your kids, or they're going to be a doormat for the government. That's all they're going to be. And this is really, really important. I know I've said this before. It's local access TV. We don't get, I wish we did get millions of viewers, and maybe someday we will. But it's really a treacherous situation, a critical situation. I don't know how to phrase it, but it's serious. It's very, very bad. If you don't start demanding this, Agenda 21, Common Core, all this garbage is going to be heaped upon you. They're going to be stealing our water, stealing our land, stealing our food, which they are doing now, but it's going to get much, much worse. Anyway, I apologize, but
well, they're after the
I thought it was important.
They are after the children. There's no question, and they are set up very much to fail. If you look at any of that curriculum with Common Core, any of those young people are going to be turned off to wanting to read. They have eliminated. There's almost no time for the teachers to teach classical literature, which we always used to hold up, human experience and slow everything right down and make decisions on how you would behave in certain, in human motivation, all the different things, when we study, whether it's Shakespeare or, in particular, say somebody like Dostoevsky, who is this great Russian writer that predicts the Russian Revolution and says that absolutely unequivocally it's going to begin with atheism in Russia. And then you watch a whole history of that. It's such an important thing. I would think that these teachers would understand that at some point they have got to stand up. The parents have got to back them, and this is a system that this Common Core has got to go. And they have to have an educational environment where these kids their creative energies are released. And this situation here reminds me of a book by famous communist historian Mikhail Heller, Cogs in a Wheel. And we listened to some of the corporate talking heads about what these kids have to do and how they have to be crafted for this to compete in the 21st century. And I thought, for what? You know, whatever they do, whatever they invent is going to be given outside the country to produce more cheaply. It's almost absurd. So,
well, we've gone from being #1 educational country in the world back in when you guys were in school.
In the 50s, yeah.
Yep. Now we're last.
well, if you take a look at dictatorships, they will destroy history. They'll destroy language. They'll control language. You can look at the history, Anglo-Irish history, and you go back through Queen Elizabeth, and you watch the destruction of Gaelic in the culture. And you can find it, in Gaelic there were 3,000 words. The British coming in, the English coming in to control Ireland, eliminated that, and they gave the Irish population some 600 words in English to learn. If you had something other than that, you were caught with a single word of Gaelic, it was a death penalty. So what did a lot of the Irish do? They had these things called the cliff schools, and what they had was they had woven rope baskets that held up these small rooms. You'd have to crawl through a small hole through an outcropping, over a part of the Irish Sea that was, tumultuous down below, and you couldn't get to it, and they maintained their history and their language, and they carried on, but it was an attempt to cut off all knowledge of their history, their heroes, and their language. In the case of the Soviet Union, initially, we looked at a thing, it was called the Pokrovsky School, and once Lenin was solidifying his power, they took any of the Russian history where they had heroes, and they destroyed their heroes, most of it largely through sexual innuendo. And then they embarked on a course where they rewrote their history, which is referred to as short course, where ultimately I think the third edition was Stalin is heavily involved, and that is literally everything that these kids were allowed. It was a common core, a common amount of knowledge, and you weren't allowed to go beyond that. So,
What about can you speak to the Scottish Enlightenment a little bit and how that had a part in our founding documents or
on the
natural law and things like that?
On the Enlightenment?
Yeah.
The Enlightenment is it's a period in Western history where you have intellectuals breaking away to a great extent from some of the restraints of the church, though a lot of the learning in Western history came from the Catholic Church. Your first scientists and scientific methodologies, and astronomy and things of this nature. But what you had was intellectuals that became involved in the sciences, and they put an enormous amount of impetus on reason and being able to construct a society rationally. And there's good and bad coming out of that. One of the writers, a primary guy, is John Locke.
Yep.
John Locke, as a philosopher, dealt with private property. And if you look at any of our founding fathers, Jefferson, Madison, any of these people, they're all students of John Locke, who said that the only reason for government is to protect private property. Everything comes from private property. There's no wealth outside of private property. There is...
which is interesting that the Communist Manifesto, that's the first right they want to take away is property.
Well, if you look at Lenin was asked, there's a couple of interesting questions he was asked. One was, how would you define communism simply? He says it's the absolute abolition of private property. The other thing he mentioned was, what type of person makes up a socialist or a communist? He said 70% are idiots, 29% are rogues. In other words, they're thieves. They're in it for something. He said 1% are true socialists. So it kind of shows where individuals like that are. They promise all of these things all at once, but the reality is they're out for power. Because you need to remember, when you dealt with those people, they claimed that they controlled the key to understanding history, what was called the dialectic. Let's say Leon Trotsky would refer to that as a locomotive of history. Yeah. That only they knew that, and they used that as a weapon against anybody outside of that particular core, only they understood it.
Right.
But when you come right down to it, when you look at the Russian Revolution, you can look at Lenin, and he begins to worry he's not going to be able to seize power, and so he speeds up, jumping up the last coup d'etat. So he never really believed in
Kinda
it,
like
but he
what's
used it as a
happening.
weapon against a population. So they always will claim that they're smarter, or they have the key to all of this knowledge, that it's really for an alternate purpose.
Somewhat like the globalists are speeding things up now because they feel threatened. Now I made a mistake at the beginning of the show. I was going to turn it over to Richie to do a disclaimer. Do you want to do that now?
Yes, but
Or is it
before
too
I do
late?
that, I wanted to make a point on top of what Pat said, because I think people don't realize it. And that is with property. We talked about this a little earlier, but it's property, basically. Property doesn't just mean the piece of land that your house is sitting on, or your car. It means your thoughts, your speech, your children. It means basically everything that's yours, that's you. And you have to understand that. Like, you've seen examples of the government putting up a little square area and saying, this is your free speech zone. Well, they might speak in there, but I speak anywhere I feel like it. That's number one. Number two, they want to start suppressing the guns now, taking your guns away. I don't need the government's permission to protect myself. None of us do. These are things that you have to understand when you look into the words property, or other words that the government uses to twist things. They've changed, like Dean said a few weeks ago, they changed the meaning of the word persons.
All right, you got about a minute.
Okay? Then let me get into the disclaimer, and we can talk about that. Hopefully I can revert it back to you, Pat. I like listening to you. The disclaimer that I had was simply this. We talked about Anna von Reitz about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I forget when it was. And Dean read a paper that she wrote going back to 1754. It's a chronological order of the degeneration of our country. Or at least that's what I'm calling it. What I wanted to say is that myself and Dean don't align ourselves with Anna von Reitz. The National Liberty Alliance do not align themselves with Anna von Reitz. What we do align ourselves with is the truth. And that's all we're trying to get out here. Awaken the people and tell the truth. That statement that Dean read was true. There were some omissions there, but still, what was read was truthful.
Okay.
With that, if Pat wants to wind up with a few things, I'd like to.
Well, we're out of time, so I want to thank you all for joining us. I hope you'll be with us next week. You can see us on YouTube at Inform New Hampshire on YouTube, and we look forward to the next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.